Welcome again. This is a really, really exciting panel for us that we'd kind of co-created. And we were holding the spirit of Grace Lee Boggs, who was a true visionary and really invited us to radical imagining in the face of devastation, and to pursue that with deep creativity and deep commitment to each other's genius. And so many of you in this room are incredible peers and partners who could, and Imi often says this as well, be on this panel and interchangeably be sharing from your perspective. And so we also want to just really hold widely the wisdom and genius that many of you are holding, and could have equally swapped out one of these lot. As amazing as they are, could have swapped them out. And hopefully will. So yeah, at some points. But particularly we picked Indy, Stephanie, Kate, and Brandon because they work at scale, that they're people who see patterns, and they also do work that helps us forecast and know or sense or feel into where we might want to go. And so as people who are holding that kind of macro, broad view, but then also building in a very granular and practical way, felt like perspectives we wanted to anchor and set off this weekend with. And so we'll have a few questions and then throw it out to you guys to also ask questions or share reflections or comments. I'm going to ask first for each speaker to introduce themselves and then really speak to what is this moment? What is this moment that is calling us, this moment that we're in? What are you seeing? What's your read? What is the clock of the world as you understand it? And we'll start with Indy.
Thank you. Well, I kind of feel like cousin Frodo, who was there right at the beginning and then keeps going off for long travels and keeps coming home. And whenever I come home, I'm just always learn more when I come home than perhaps when I've learned in my travels. So it's an honor to be back, really. In many ways, I'm Indy Johar from Dark Matter Labs. Kind of is and is not important, but maybe where I'd like to go is, like all stories that you tell, the question is, what is a story to be told now? And there are many ways to tell this story. And the pattern I'm seeing is that, on one hand, the planet is forcibly re-entangling us. Forcibly re-entangling us. It was always entangled, but we lived with the delusion of our separation. We live with the delusion of the distance. And right now, we're living in a moment where the planet is forcibly re-entangling us. And why I use that language is that I think that re-entanglement is also the location of the war that we're in the midst of. A war of those that seek a 19th to 20th century freedom. A freedom rooted in separationism, a freedom rooted in their sovereignty, a divisible sovereignty, and a freedom rooted in actually a fear. And I would argue that is the sort of structural war that we're in the middle of. A planet which is re-entangling, and parts of that planet forcibly trying to remain independent, sovereign, and in other ways operating in a different way. At the same time, it's worth recognizing the scope of that other path, this kind of 19th to 20th century freedom. What is being argued for is, and I think it's worth recognizing, the MAGA movement in the US is arguing from an existential idea of crisis, a crisis of the idea of America itself. It's not just ideological, it's like an existential idea of America. America was born in the idea of property, and we the people of the present with the right for property as an idea. And in the re-entanglement, we are seeing a challenge to that fundamental notion, because the entanglement is not just in space, it's also in time. And theories of property rooted in dominion, control, oppression, no longer function in a relationship of complexity and other forms of operating. The idea of certainty, control, all these things no longer work. And so what we are in is a conflict of those two worldviews. The sovereign, the kind of world of MAGA, and if you get into some of those conversations, which I'm sure many of you are, or some of you are, you realize, rooted in existential crisis, it perceives a right to Finland, or to Greenland and other parts, because it's existential to their existence, way of seeing the world. It's not about the rule of law, it's an idea of survival from that perspective. And why that's important to understand is that what it lays out a pathway for is a form of violence that I think is unprecedented at a planetary scale. And that unprecedented violence at a planetary scale is often talked about subtly in rooms, and I've heard major philanthropists talk about it, saying, Indy, the planet is a home to about 1 billion people. The real subtle question in there is what happens to the 7.5 billion. And what we're seeing is a war of this idea that actually there is a pathway to win in separation. This is a delusion. This is the delusion that must be shattered, because the only pathway available is actually in embracing the re-entanglement. Now, why the re-entanglement is important is the re-entanglement also is rooted in a different way of recognizing ourselves. Firstly, I don't like you quoting Descartes, but I feel like there may be a way to quote Descartes that might be interesting. Descartes is reputed to why he's written, I think, therefore I am. But the more interesting parts of Descartes is I doubt, therefore I think, therefore I am. Doubt. Why doubt is important is rooted in the idea that I can never know everything. The ability to work in the fact that you cannot know everything is, I think, the greatest moment. Because once you recognize you cannot know everything, you have to work in a theory of tenderness, care, and in relationship. So doubt is the magical moment. Certainty, control, instruction, all these logics of the last 400-year worldviews actually do not work in complexity. They do not work in relationality. They do not work in the idea of actually knowing the scale of the world, the scale of the universe that we're operating in. That doubt also means that we have to operate ourselves differently. And I think there are 4 revolutions that I think are at the root of what I would argue is that you guys are practicing on the ground. There's a revolution to what it means to be human, a human not rooted in certainty, but in doubt. A humanity rooted in tenderness, not in control, not in instruction. A humanity rooted in care for the future, not just the violence for a future. But also, it's in a human project that recognizes all the things that we were seeing earlier. A humanity that recognizes that we are a multitude. Our brain is not my brain, but a social brain, an epigenetic brain, an epigenetic reality, a microbiome reality. We are fields of operation. The reality, I would argue, and this is slightly controversial, we are all we, they, them. This is controversial, I know. And it's not about appropriation. I think it's about, for me, about recognizing our biological manifestational reality. And maybe that's the moment when we all wake up, or when we realize our capacity to operate in those pronouns. This also extends to our theory of machines. We create machines and machines create us. What is a machine logic which is rooted in tenderness, not in control and instruction? What is a machine logic which is rooted in care? This also then manifests in our thesis with land and place. Because actually, I think one of the greatest fallacies I see more and more is this separation of the wild and the cultivated. This is an illusionary binary, a binary born out of the 19th century of a man standing over a hill looking into the wild. Places like the Amazon root us into a different way of seeing the world, which is rooted in terra preta, where you look at a symbiotic relationship of human and the cultivated and the wild as a symbiosis, as opposed to a separation. That challenges all of our theories of property, ownership, custodianship, all those things, logics melt away. And then perhaps finally, it also opens up a bigger question of not just land, but also our material economy. So, the timber here, you can own the timber, but you also own the liability of 500 years worth of carbon that needs to be sequestered. Ownership is not the possession, the right to abuse, which is what it is. Property is the right to use and abuse and other things. It is also the priority to steward, to own those liabilities. Same here. Do you think this will last 500 years? And so it asks us a different question with our material world as well. So for me, the moves that we're seeing, and these are from my perspective, not truth, the only viable pathway that I see in front of us is a reimagination of what it means to be human, reimagination of actually the machines we make, a reimagination of our relationship with land and place and soil, and a reimagination fundamentally of our material world in fundamental terms. And only by rebuilding those relationships can we build a harmonious relationship with the planet in a meaningful way. At the same time, I do also want to say that I think we face a fork between mutually assured destruction and mutually assured thriving. There's only really one choice, because you are live, you live, and that is mutually assured thriving. Every other route of separation, isolationism, and illusions of subject small sovereignties takes us to death. And that is because the nature of anything that is right now single point optimizing, moving to one point, will externalize and create violences that are so significant that will destroy us all. And maybe the final point I want to make is the calculus of war, right, is what is being measured in places like in the military system. What is the calculus of war? I heard somebody say, well, we are going to have 3 billion population. This is military analysis, right? And the calculus of war is misunderstanding something fundamentally. And I'm going to put this forward to you because you need to be able to negate those conversations. It is not sufficient to accept those conversations. You have to destroy those conversations when they whisper into the room, because they do whisper into rooms as passive realities. And the reason why it's important to destroy them is right now the biggest problem. Say, and this was the exact conversation I had, if you lose 7 billion people, what makes you think it stops? What makes you give you the illusion it stops? And I tell you why it's an illusion. When we create this much trauma and violence, we will create a society of sociopaths which will burn everything down. Everything will be burnt. When I say those words, the hair stand up on the back of my neck because I can feel it. It is not even the function of anything else. And when you build that sociopathic behavior and you add the capacity of CRISPR and bioweaponry, I guarantee you we can burn everything down. And that is why there is no meaningful pathway for violence or war to win anything right now. And it is a delusion. The only pathway that sits before us is a pathway that is assembling here. In deep relationality, in tenderness, in a relationship of technology which is fundamentally different, and recasting a new vision. And I think this vision is so important because the planet, in my view, is becoming self-aware. You are the planet becoming self-aware. The planet has spent its energy, stored energy, for the planet to become self-aware. You are 8.5 billion people where the planet is becoming self-aware and self-conscious. It is an extraordinary gift. And in that gift, I think there is a massive opportunity to actually unfurl a completely different model of civilization, and it is a prerequisite to moving forward. This is the end of what is viably possible in the old worldview. It is no longer carry-forwardable. And so this is inevitable. And that is probably my core message. Where we sit in every fractal relationship, whether we're caring about materials, whether we're caring, it is inevitable. There is manifest destiny right now in the room because there is no other choice. Everything else is a delusion. And that, to me, is the core invitation of the moment we sit in.
Thank you for the wake up. I was a bit sleepy, thought I might need a coffee, and I'm awake. But really, it is a waking up, and it's a waking up and into our we, they, them, and our deep capacity for relationship, but also being that, being in the tenderness, being in the entanglement and embracing that, and finding new ways of being more than human and consciousness, the planet, land, all of those things. And that feels thrilling to me. It's the things that make me feel alive, because I also sense and feel that path, that harmonizing, and that awareness that we're being reckoned with. And I hope we choose it. We choose life towards life. I'm going to invite Kate now to share a bit about what you're seeing, what you think the moment is, and a bit about your work.
Thank you. So I'm really tempted to give everybody just 2 minutes of just quiet to let that sink in, because there was a lot there. Thank you, Indy. I'm Kate Raworth. So I wrote a book called Donut Economics, which, well, all I can say is I'm insanely humbled by what Civic Square have done with it. It came out in 2017, and it was within, I don't know, 18 months that I got a tweet from Birmingham saying, oh, we're having this book club, do you want to connect? And we've connected and been at the hip ever since. But I do sincerely, just sitting here, just listening to Daniel talking about the book club, and, you know, damn, if people, you start with a book club and you end here, damn. It's amazing, and I feel really, really profoundly humbled. And actually, I'll be honest, I feel so much more in listening mode than speaking modes, but I'm just going to name that. So I really enjoyed hearing Indy, and I'm just listening all weekend. So Donut Economics came out in 2017. It was my reaction to studying economics at university here. So as a white British woman studying economics at the University of Oxford, you know, like, go to the heart of it, why don't you? What was the mindset that I was taught in the 1990s? And just aware that it's still being taught, it's still being replicated all over the world to students from all over, that Western economic mindset is being exported the world over. So donut economics is a response to that, saying actually we need to deeply change the way we're taught to think, because even today's students are being indoctrinated with a mindset that just in no way equips them for the times that we've just heard we're in. So it's a mindset shift. So it's full of ideas of ways of thinking. But what was amazing when the book came out was that people got in touch and said, and we want to do this. We are doing this. We've already been doing this. You've just named with pictures and words the thing we're already doing, the thing we're already committed to. And it gives a frame, it gives something we can show to others. It gives a kind of theoretical casing to work that we're already practicing. And so people started getting in touch. And so I co-founded Donut Economics Action Lab to help connect people who were in towns and cities or schools or businesses or communities, putting these ideas into practice. And it's all, the name means everything. It's an action lab. It's all about taking theoretical ideas and putting them to action, and a lab of learning how do we do this together. And my colleague Rob Shorter is here with me this weekend, is running some workshops as well. So we are delighted to be here amongst many peers from the learning journeys, but just kudos to everybody through the work of Civic Square with like just the joy and creativity and the groundedness and the tangibility that it's taken from a book to something far, far, far more than I could have ever imagined it. I feel deeply humbled. So I'm going to just build on the amazing big picture that Indy's just given us about the planet forcibly re-entangling us and making that ever entanglement really visible and visceral in painful ways, but also in possible ways. What am I seeing in relation to that? One is that's 20th century story of freedom, right? Can we, those who deeply resist the entanglement still insisting on the nation as a unit, and then the big man coming forward as the leader. And so I'm just really struck, as we all are forced to see, the rise of this big man character and the use of social media and how they project and communicate. And it's incredibly effective, like in a terrifyingly effective way, with visuals, with one-liners, often with their humor, which works for that audience, with clever props, you know, a board of tariffs or a chainsaw, or like seizing the communication. And then you see the opposition are often still saying statistics or something that just is too long, too complex. So there's an amazing form of communication that they have captured that I'm baffled and fascinated by, and trying to think, what is the response? Do you go there, or do you find something else different from that? How do we find ways of communicating? But again, this work, I think, is so often communicated beautifully with joy, and like Civic Square's work, like exemplary, just it's all around us, just the beauty of the script, the image, and the tangibility. So how do we make sure that we communicate as irresistibly as they're managing to communicate to their audience? I'm really struck by governments, national governments, again, in the face of inevitable re-entanglement, actually holding on to a very 20th century economic story of growth. So in the 2010s, when I was writing Donut Economics, I was listening really carefully to how governments were talking about growth or progress. And they put lots of adjectives in front. So they'd say, we want lasting, green, resilient growth, or strong, stable, inclusive growth. And like all these adjectives came, and it was kind of comic, because, you know, you clearly want something more than growth because you're having to put 5 or 6 adjectives before it, but it always would end with this noun of growth. And then it was Trump who came along in 2017. He just wiped away all the adjectives and was for growth. And it was really shocking when it first happened. And he started going, I think we could have 4%, maybe 6%. He was harking back to President John F. Kennedy in 1960 when he was elected on the promise of growth. But these are not the 60s, right? So much has changed. But in the way he communicated, the brazen simplicity of it was, if I can just take all that away and I can go back for growth. And what's really shocked me is the way that this country in particular has just picked that up. Liz Truss, growth, growth, growth. And then Keir Starmer, growth, growth, growth. Like, it's extraordinary. And so now we have a government here, just to bring it just to this one little country, we have a government here that boldly stands for growth. We've got to build houses to grow the economy. Like, the logic is so inverted. We've got to push aside the environmental regulations so that we can build houses, so that the economy grows. It's an insane reordering of what actually matters. So how do we break into their deep attachment to this growth narrative? Also the focus on government debt and deficits and this very simplistic language around the idea that a government should have a break even, even, but just totally missing the role of government in actually enabling spending into the economy in order to provide for social care and social need and injustice. How do we break the journalists' hold and the way that journalists ask questions to make it sound like, well, the government should have a balanced budget, the government shouldn't be in debt. So again, the economics that's churned out means that people are taught to ask really simplistic questions and the narrative becomes dangerously simplified. Two last thoughts. Just the obvious loss of civil society momentum. Like we saw the climate youth justice movement pre-COVID, the amazing mobilization of young people that was phenomenal, and then COVID closed that down, and now draconian policing, whether it's climate protesters, whether it's pro-Palestinian protesters, like the draconian policing that is shutting down everyday people's daring to join in. We still see the leaders of that standing up, but in more and more fragile spaces, but that mass joining behind. So where is the popular space? Where are we going to find that? And then the last thought I want to share, in response to Indy talking about making it inevitable. So Milton Friedman in the 1940s was trying to make neoliberalism the economic ideology. He was in the wasteland. It was all Keynesian. It was all government-led spending. And he wanted to make neoliberalism the ideology. And they founded the Mont Pelerin Society and started seeding these ideas. But he said this, and they won, right? We know they won. They won around, let's say, 1980, when Reagan and Thatcher take the international stage and make neoliberalism the mainstream. But Milton Friedman said this. He said, only a crisis, actual or perceived, brings about real change. And when that crisis occurs, people turn to the ideas that are lying around. Then he goes on, he says, that, I believe, is our basic function, to develop alternatives to existing policies, to keep them alive and available until the politically impossible becomes the politically inevitable. So just hear that for our times, right? Our basic function is to develop alternatives to existing policies, keep them alive and available until the impossible becomes the inevitable. So Milton Friedman won. It took him 33 years, and they had massive corporate money behind them to seed think tanks that would spout out their theories, to put professorships in universities that would make it seem academically rigorous. We don't have that kind of money on side. But what we do have, and go back, he says, people will turn to the ideas that are lying around. And I always thought, well, why would you want your ideas just lying around in a book, like a theory that's lying around? What if those ideas weren't just lying around, but they were up and running? And I believe that is what this community and this network and all the networks that we're networked to, that's what this is. Get these ideas up and running in places that are just ready to start, no matter how small scale, no matter that they're not in the political center, they're local communities, local councils, community groups. We're just going to start. And that's what drives me every day. People knowing that they can't do the whole because the bigger system of national, regional, global regulation, financial capital is going to oppress that effort, and yet still people start. So let's get these ideas, let's keep them up and running at demonstrator scale, alive and accessible, because the politically impossible, what feels sometimes politically impossible, it will become, for the vision of mutually assured thriving that Indy's talking about, to be the politically inevitable, and these are the seeds, and we're holding them. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay, especially for really helping us sense and see the way that narrative and communication is being used, and also like the power of simplicity that is used by the opposition, and the way that it's grabbed center. And then also just the way that what we're doing and what we're a part of can be these deeply socialized, integrated part of civil society building that are our ideas lying around, but living up and running and demonstrated and alive. So thank you for that. I'm going to hand over to Stephanie.
Thank you. I'm Stephanie Brobbey. I use she, her pronouns. Most people call me Steph. And I am the founder and CEO of the Good Ancestor Movement, having spent a decade practicing in the City of London as a private wealth lawyer. So I had quite a dramatic conversion, I suppose, or evolution out of the square mile in London, practicing private wealth, which was essentially helping rich people get richer, helping people minimize tax. And I became very, very politicized around the work that I was doing, particularly having regard to my background as someone who had, grew up in a working class community, daughter of migrants, and, relied quite heavily on the state in many different capacities. So I had this kind of decade-long embodied experience of like capital in the 21st century, and became really obsessed actually with the patterns that I saw as someone that was proximate to some of the wealthiest families in the world, and seeing, beginning to see the mapping of capital and the relationship to capital, seeing that the same, it was the same families, the same types of people selling property to one another, the same types of people sitting on the boards of FTSE 100 listed companies, the same people sat on the boards of, our large institutional philanthropic foundations, and seeing that capital continue to circulate in the same way over many generations. So that's the kind of starting point for me, is to track, like, what is capital doing? I just realized I haven't explained what I do now, alongside my amazing colleague Kiki Marga, who's sat right there opposite me. Big up, Kiki. And I started the Good Ancestor Movement nearly 4 years ago now, really as a response to what I was seeing in the context of like wealth and capital increasing for a certain group, a certain demographic, seeing capital concentrating, and at the same time, through some work that I was doing in the philanthropic space and in the social sector, understanding that inequality and climate change were two indicators of something not being quite right about the way that capital and opportunity, resources were flowing, or not, as the case may be. So there's a few things that I'm noticing, and forgive me, I will probably not be very linear in how I communicate some of my thoughts at the moment, but I feel like that's apt given what's on the screen behind me. I'm thinking about, to set the scene, the great wealth transfer, which I feel like we haven't been talking about as much of late, but the great wealth transfer was one of the reasons why I had this real impatience around like getting out of the city and actually creating an ecosystem where wealthy people who had some kind of orientation towards social justice, social change, could be supported to steward their capital in a different way, and to center redistribution as a fundamental part of that realigned relationship to capital stewardship. And that is something, a minimum of 30 trillion actually, US dollars, kind of changing hands between baby boomers and millennials. The boomer generation has benefited from, the likes of Milton Friedman's policies, and those that kind of have benefited through inheritance or selling, creating wealth. Those that often describe themselves as self-made. No one's ever self-made. But there is this is the largest intergenerational wealth transfer in human history. And we need to remember that and to focus our attention on that. That is happening like now. Assets are being passed on. The capital is being further entrenched into maybe new hands, maybe not new hands, because there are all these structures set up like trusts to ensure the smooth succession of private wealth and assets. And so just foregrounding that as something that is continually happening, that capital isn't the default structures and systems that we have in place will want to make sure, will want to snap back to defend that capital so that it's further entrenched. I had the misfortune of going to a conference that I try and avoid as much as I can, but I am invited to every year. It's called Spears Live. Spears is a kind of luxury magazine for ultra-high net wealth individuals, and there's like an index of advisors from, luxury yacht dealers to, it's really gross. But I also happened to be in it, and they had to create a new category for me because I didn't fit into any of the other categories, lols. But I was at this conference, and there was one of these, I think a chief investment advisor at like an asset management firm, very establishment, and giving a kind of macroeconomic outlook. And he said something that really kind of haunted me, which was that, militarization is really productive for the economy. Yeah. And, we're not hearing the counter to that, right? We're not, of course, that was not a space where they were talking about, bombardment and Palestinian liberation and, all the things that we should be talking about, from Haiti to Sudan to the DRC, right? We know what militarization is doing, and the knock-on effect that has for our ecology, our local economies and societies. But I wanted to mention that because this is something that we've seen, if we go back into history, we look at the 20s and 30s, and, rearmament, militarization, and the way that can be so seductive for anyone, really, in understanding that, it's gonna, this is what's gonna contribute to the growth agenda, and it's something that we need, and just paying attention to what, our governments are doing and what they're funding, the increased spending on defense, and remembering that that's not just something that we have to resist as a matter of principle and morality, but it's of economic concern. I'm thinking about, where should I go next? I don't know if anyone saw the article in the Times, I think in April, where Orlando Fraser, who's the outgoing chair of the Charity Commission, was quoted saying this. He told the Times that the Charity Commission gets a lot of complaints about charities' wokery, but these usually fall outside of its regulatory remit. But if a charity decides that it's not so much a charity, but an engine for social progress, we can step in. And so charities should not regard themselves as engines for social progress. Just let that land. And, we have to be expansive when we're thinking about the word charities. We're thinking about anyone who is organizing around social change, around social transformation, around justice. That was for all of us. So I read that and I thought, wow, I'm shook, but yeah, let's go, right? I've long maintained that, you know, charity, the structure of charity, the origins of it in this country, in this jurisdiction, charity is where justice goes to be composted. That's where it's not, we can't rely on it as a strategy to transform. And I know that will not be news to any of you in this room. And, you know, a lot of folks are not organized around the structure of charity, but it's thinking about that. What does that mean for the broader sector that we all interact with, the philanthropic, social sector, for folks that are mobilizing resources? And I appreciate that, you know, Orlando Fraser is the outgoing chair, but we know from what this current government is doing, what we're seeing in terms of this wave of reactionary politics, all the stuff in the press recently that's been around migrants, and we know about the Supreme Court's ruling on, and the impact on our trans siblings, and this increasing hostility around anything that is oriented towards justice and structural change. And so I can mention all these things because the meditation on my heart is, are these things going to draw us towards one another or away from each other? And yeah, I'm also thinking about, I don't know how much time I've got left, but 1 minute. Yeah, no, just thinking about, you know, Brandon, it's really, you know, it's great that you're here, and just extend solidarity to all our cousins across the pond, because, you know, I'm sure many of us here are paying attention to the criminalization of civil society that's happening, right? And like, we have a duty to be in solidarity with our you know, our siblings across the pond, and we have a narrow window right now. We have a really narrow window to learn, to come together, to organize, to strategize, to be in right relationship with one another, beyond friendship, beyond like good vibes, but like moving into practicing solidarity. And are we going to be here to do that work, to be in relationship and transform, or are we going to peace out and try and, you know, build some good work, but not actually transform ourselves? So I think I'll leave that there.
You know, the reason I try and do a little bit of a like, oh, that really landed for me, is I learn it as an access point, that sometimes it helps people ground and remember after a speaker's spoken. But with each of you is so vast, I'm like, how do you just like pick out one thing and like re-anchor? But I also trust there are so many of us here that we can be in conversation and keep reflecting on things that you're sharing. And I just, this meditation on your heart, of like, in this moment where we've got a window where justice is being narrowed, do we lean in, not just as vibes and just as friends, but like in a deep process of commitment, loving, and transformation? And I'm taking that meditation too. Thank you. Brandon.
Hey, family.
Cousin Brandon.
Cousin Brandon here. Brandon Sturdivant, he, him pronouns. Co-founder and co-executive director of the Mass Liberation Network. We are an abolitionist political home for 20 some odd organizations in a few states in the US. I think I'm also here primarily as a somatic practitioner, somebody who's used somatic practice to transform my life and support other folks to transform theirs as well. I do want to anchor like my perspective. My work is about ending the criminal legal system in the US. I know folks may have some perspective on that just, you know, blackness is criminalized all over the world, and in the US in particular, we we end up in prison. 1 out of 3 black males can expect to spend some time in not just jail, but in actual prison in their lifetime. And the organization I rock with and loved and helped create, we support organizations to close prisons, to transform the public safety system from something that continues to step on the necks of black folks to get the hell out of the way so we can stand up and thrive. Like, that's the long-term vision, and we need that system. It is like the tip of the spear, right? Your local sheriff, police officer, when ICE comes in, they have, if they're effective at their destruction and violence, they work with those local authorities to capture and cage our people. In that work, what we've recognized is to do the work of imagining a new world and build that new world, we have to transform ourselves. So the criminal legal system does some really terrible things, and it really connects deeply with what we bring back through somatic practice. It takes away your dignity by locking you in a cage, and shame from folks whose family members are locked in cages, right? Takes away belonging, literally separates folks from community behind these big walls with these barred gates, and to even go in, you have to be dehumanized to get there. And then it takes away your safety. It is like the site where folks are supposed to be safe, right? A public safety system, and it makes us the most unsafe. So those 3 things together, it is an engine of trauma, right? Taking away our safety, our belonging, our dignity. And we use somatic practice to give us those things back, to give us from the inside out belonging, to give us safety, to give us dignity, and then to let ourselves organize around a purpose, which is ultimately, for the folks that I rock with, freeing our people. Ashe? The other thing I'll say is the importance of somatic practice for us is about, and this is for everybody, if you can't feel yourself, you can't feel other people. And if you can't feel other people, you shouldn't lead. Like, that is a ground, you shouldn't lead anything, a family. So getting to the question of like what's this moment? I think what I'm seeing, what we're seeing, is really a moment of like a death of institutions. So there was like a time when if something happened, there were certain folks you looked to for meaning, or like how do I actually organize myself around this? It was the church. I don't know about y'all. I don't know a lot of people who actually go to churches and are active members anymore. It was the local community center. Resources have been stripped from our communities, and those community centers, those places of belonging, like, they just don't exist in the same way. Like the networks and things we kind of leaned on for support have been systematically either decimated or just are completely outdated. And in some versions, for some of us in certain, religious institutions, never fucked with our people anyway, right? Harmed us anyway. I mean, why is that important? That means that we're in a space, and I would say in the US in particular, but globally, where we're literally looking for somebody to say, like, what's actually happening? And how do we, like, get on the same page collectively about what means a collective worldview? You know, what's a good life? What's important to me? There's some deep challenge with that, but I also think there's a hell of a lot of opportunity right now. Because with the dearth of a person or a particular worldview saying this is right, this is the way we should be, there's a hell of a lot of opportunity for us to collectively create that right now if we choose to step in. What do I mean by that? And for me, things just land in people. My son, young black man, 21 years old, in Oakland, California, There was a way that I grew up where white supremacy was accepted, where how we treated and thought about our queer family was pervasive, right? With what I should do with my life, I should yearn to just make money, right? To have a particular kind of good life. Like those were the things that like organized me, and those things are, for a 21-year-old boy from West Oakland, from the community, it's gone. It's completely gone. He went to school for a year, he did very well. He chose to drop out of school, right? His name was Brandon. He changed his name to Mikhail because he wants to create a new identity for himself in the world. He doesn't go to church. He has like a local community of folks that he does spiritual practice with. There's a fucking opportunity there if we actually take a step back and look and like how particularly are our young folks organizing themselves and choosing to be in this moment. That for me takes a bit of the things that are falling around us, and y'all are building some new shit here, so it's less like this for y'all, but I think in many places there's a sense of dread and despair that can get in the way of blood. There is some real hope. There is some real opportunity if we choose to act together. And it's gonna take different things from our bodies to create those collective pathways. And I'll pause there because we have a few other questions. Yeah.
I was gonna ask a follow-up question to you all about what is required of us and who do we need to be. And I feel you kind of all touched on that in some way. So I might, for the next 20 minutes, like throw it out if there's a question in the room. And if any of you wanna, I really wanna respond to those questions of who do we need to be, what is required of us, you can go there, but maybe just make space for one or two questions from the room. And don't be shy now, because I know a lot of you and you're spicy, so.
Oh, hi, my name is Jenny, and I have the most beautiful badge made by Charlotte this morning of my grapevine in my conservatory, which I'm going to treasure already. Thank you so much, all of you. It's a real pleasure to hear you speak. Kate Raworth, I know about you, and Indy Johar, I know about you, but Brandon and Stephanie, thank you so much as well. My question for Indy, you talked about the 4 revolutions, and I wrote loads of notes, but I didn't really understand the revolution with regards to the machine. And you said we need to have a fundamentally different relationship with technology. I'd really love to unpack that a little bit, please.
My name is Abdirahim, and it actually touches on a bit of that question around language, and something Kate said that really stuck with me and sticks with me on a daily basis in my practice. How do we make the language we use more inclusive in the spirit of Trump's stupidity and the way that he's so simple and the way that he communicates simply? And I think about how we communicate to our masses, our collectives, and how we appeal to people more, and this idea of intellectualizing conversations and needing to also intellectualize conversations at the same time.
Yeah. Could I just pick up on this conversation about language as well, just for a bit of fun? So I actually think one of the problems is that we fell into TED world, And in TED world, there is this idea of communicating in 15 minutes, some world-changing idea. And it's all about this simplicity of an emotional conversation. Hi, I'm Indy Johar, I had an epiphany on top of a mountain that changed my world, and then I built this. And I think the problem is we've been rooted into the idea of simple English, simple languages, 15-minute conversations. You go to Joe Rogan, it's a 3.5-hour conversation. 3.5-hour conversation. I actually think it's the other way around. It's not about the simplicity of communication, it is about the richness of conversation. And a rich conversation which is 3 hours long, as long as you're empathetic and actually in dialogue, you can cover the world from monetary policy all the way down, because everyone's smart enough. That's my experience. Everyone's smart enough. So I wonder whether the question is less about how do we change our language, but how do we broaden up landscapes of conversation? And I think, and that's been my, this was my genuine lesson in Birmingham. Imi invited me to do a talk in, I don't know, it was, where was it? Like in the tents, at the back, and, yeah, you know, I know, but you, right, and I was having this conversation, and this gentleman walked up. Must have been late 80s or something. He walked up afterwards and said, "Indy, I didn't get everything what you were saying, but you were putting words into what I was feeling." Right? I was like, shit. Right? That's important. And I also think we just need to let ourselves go. As long as we're human in the dialogue, gosh, the capacity for the world to understand is massive. So let's let go of simple English and the kind of whole smallness of debate. Let's embrace the warmth of conversation as one thing. That's kind of a virus that I think he wants to. That was one thing I wanted to say. On the machine thing, I think the thing that I'm struck with is that the idea of certainty, the idea of control, the idea of instruction is an idea. It is not only how we have machined ourselves into units of labor, units of instruction. We create roles, we create employment. There's a machining of ourselves, but we are also creating the machines around us in the same format. And this is a symbiotic journey. And this is why I said about doubt. I'm more and more fascinated by doubt and the capacity to not know. And then how do you operate in the not knowing? And if we are genuinely operating in a complex, entangled, informationally impossible for any one of us to know world and universe, then the operational mode is not out of certainty. It is not out of instruction. It is not out of dominion, because none of those strategies work in that reality. I'm not making a moral argument. I'm making almost a sort of techno-informational argument. It's impossible. It is not informationally possible. If that's the case, then our theory of working with machines is about tender machines. Machines that operate on the edge of certainty and operate in relationship to doubt. It is a whole thesis of machines that are operating and imagining and cohabiting the world differently. And why I think it's important for us to relate to the landscape of machines is either we'll relate to them or capital will make them tools of control, tools of instruction, and tools of dominion. And that is where, as Stephanie was rightly pointing out, the return on capital is doing this, and the return on labor has done this. You have to reimagine the machine as part of the reimagination of the future world, because unless we don't, all the capital will become the war machine, an anti-human war machine, as Steph was rightly, perfectly saying. So I think this is why I'm saying it's really important to reimagine the machine as much as it is to reimagine the human. That is a symbiotic relationship in my view. We reimagine the machine, and we'll reimagine ourselves and liberate ourselves from the theory of labor, instruction, control, employment, which I think are all extensions of the kind of the things we have to dismantle in terms of the abolitionist movement. It doesn't just stop. They're all extensions of our enslavement in different formats.
I just wanted to add something on the point about language, the two things that I've been thinking about, just as you said that, you asked that question, Abdi. The first is, I don't know if you've come across an essay by Chanel Matthews, who's a distinguished lecturer at the City College of New York. I'll drop it in the WhatsApp. But it's an amazing essay. It was two essays, but I think the first is the left's radical reassignment. And these were some essays that were published after the return of He Who Shall Not Be Named. And she talks about like the way, and obviously that's specifically in relation to the left and like leftist progressive politics and social movements, how much our language is actually alienating and how it's not rooted in the material conditions of like the working class at the very heart of like, you know, leftist politics. And it's just worth reading some of a couple of her essays about the way that we communicate. And the second thing is, like, as between us, I don't think that we can escape connection and the way that we connect. And I'm sorry, I've said this so many times, and I know some people are probably sick of it, but like, we are not going to be able to do anything and build anything sustainable and long-lasting if we don't focus on building a cross-class, cross-gender, multiracial, like non-disabled, disabled, like coalition, like a container for our organizing. And that, because that requires us to have a posture that is willing to understand one another, that enables us to properly connect and to see each other and be seen by each other. And part of that is language, but part of that is the container that we co-create in order to hear and see each other. I think that's really important.
And to do that, again, I think earlier I said it's not theoretical. It happens like through our bodies, through us being able to be in relationship with each other differently. And so some of the things that, like what allows for that to be possible, it sounds like we need a collective shape, right? And do we all know what we mean by shape in somatics or in anything like that? So it's like my shape spells my capacity. So as a leader, so my shape is about my narrative. What do I think about the world? Good world, bad world, opportunity, challenge. It's about my emotional range. Am I able to feel a range of emotions? Do I just traffic in sadness or override and go into, toxic positivity? Can I experience grounded joy? Can I look outside and experience awe? The quality of relationships. Do I have relationships with folks where I can have like actual generative conflict? Do I have relationships of accountability? Or do I feel most comfortable and I'm only able to be in space and in relationship with people who say, yes, you're right, Brandon, great job, right? Like all of those things kind of come together. And I will say also our capacity to feel sensation, right? Can I feel the world from the waist down? And if I'm able-bodied. Yeah, our shape deeply spells our relationship to the world and the quality of whatever we are building. And the arc of transformation that we talk about is about changing and allowing more us to transform that shape to be there. So in this moment, as a movement, do we have space for generative conflict? I don't have to get along with you to actually be in relationship with you. Do we have capacity for collaboration? Right? Like I actually can come alongside you in what's important to you and collectively say like, this is our commitment. Do I have the power? Do we have the collective capacity to resist? Right? There's gonna take resistance. Can we take risk together? Can we fail together? All of those things happen like through our bodies.
Brandon, I was talking to Farzana, sorry.
There's another question behind you.
Just one more question.
Okay, go for it.
Do you have another round of applause because I messed that up, sorry.
It wasn't so much a question, but more to kind of like think about what Farzana was saying about how like any one of us out here also could like be on that stage, and that gave me courage to kind of add to the idea of language that like we have multiple languages, right? There's like mother tongue, there's body language, there's like the arts, visual languages, creative languages, technological languages, theory, activism. All of these are all various languages. And in this room, I don't know how many languages fill this room, but it requires all of these different ways of talking, whether that's through simplified language. The complexity of all of these issues requires an entanglement of all of these various languages. And I just kind of wanted to hit that home because we all speak so many different tongues. We all write, we create, we visualize, and I just feel like all of those ways of communicating can bridge those gaps for all of the various audiences and receivers in the room.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I think that for time's sake, we might this point as an extended panel, we might actually like conclude on that there is a multitude of languages available to us, and some of them are verbal and some of them are not. And how do we have a place for the rigor, for the simplicity that we're going to need, for the different modalities of communication, and also get strategic and coordinated around it? Because I think that's also the bit that's missing, is that our strategy often has us isolated in doing that instead of seeing a broad, multi-dimensional project that we're in, and how do we take the rigor of someone's voice and visualize it, or how do we make something song that is a simplified so it carries across spaces. And I'm really excited about how this weekend can be an invitation to that. Panel, is there anything burning sensation, one-liners, mic drops that you want to leave us with before we hand back to Civic Square?
There was just one thing that I think was tacitly put down, which I think is really important. The architecture of state may not be our friend here. And I think that's something that's really important. I don't mean the people in state. I think the people who are operating in the theories of state actually want as much change as we all want, but the architecture of state and how it's been designed will almost certainly become a pathway of violence, as much as corporatism is. And I think being conscious of that and being in standing of that is going to require us to have a different theory of change in operationalizing into that. And I think it's really, it means the work that many of you do and many of us do will have to have a pathway of change in a very particular way. And I think it's just being aware of that violence that's emerging, and that will continue to emerge now.
No, the only comment I was going to say was what she said, exactly. I loved your point. What's your name? Sorry? Rue. There are so many languages, so I don't need to say it again. I just like, that was, yes! We swapped out. I love it. Room of the panel.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo something that Brandon said, which was about like, I don't know if you said I don't need to be friends with you to, or I don't need to have a necessarily like a good relationship with you in order to. Sorry, Brandon, I'm butchering it completely. Let me just focus on what I wanted to say, which was like, sorry, Brandon. Okay, thank you. And that is really important because I had an experience of like quite significant rupture with some external colleagues in the field last year. And I, had to say, like, at the moment, like, friendship is off the table, right? But I remain committed to being in solidarity with you in the work. And I just wanted to name that because it's hard to talk about those things sometimes, but I'm talking from like a scar, not a scab now, so it's all good. But I just wanted to put that out there to normalize the idea that it's not always going to be a bed of roses, but we can, and there are exceptions to this, of course, and we've got to have a fuller conversation about the way that certain bodies have to end up having to absorb more when it comes to harm and rupture, and that's a real conversation that we need to have. And there is also space to continue being in solidarity in the work as we build.
I think I want to say one last thing. Is that all right? Okay. Because I think there's this thing about like, so what is happening right now? There's a bank there's a bank heist happening before our eyes in the U.S. with this president. They're stealing money, right? They're eroding the infrastructure. So like, right now we're on record for the lowest murder rate in decades in the U.S., which is a fucking big thing for black people who die by gun violence, right? Y'all hear about the mass shootings? There are like black people every day die from gun violence in the U.S. at crazy rates. And he just recently like eroded the infrastructure of violence prevention that's been like propelling that. I can go on to 3 or 4 things that dude has done that is like potentially long-term decimating our communities. And simultaneously, the majority of black folks that I know do not feel like their lives are materially different with him in office. And so I say that because there is a lot of Trump rhetoric, and I think the whole damn thing has needed to change for a while now. And this is also an opportunity to be like, for it to be the impetus to come across difference and do some transformation. Because if we do it as like, Trump did this thing, so now it leaves some folks out who are like, man, my life has been fucked up for a while now. Yeah. I've needed change for a long time. But that frame is limiting, but the frame that we all have an opportunity to change for generations to come invites so many more folks in.
I just want to really thank our panelists and our extended panelists, so just giving a big up to them. Back to you, Emily.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Farzana. Thank you, Brandon, Kate, Stephanie, Indy. And thanks for everyone for sitting in with it. We thought it was a really important moment in the weekend to take a bit of time this morning before, no doubt, a group like this explodes into action and hugs and tears and making and creating and all the magic that is going to happen. So I just, well, looking by the amount of you that are still in the room, this was a good decision. So well done, everyone. Thank you so much. And really, really neatly, the rain has now cleared up for the rest of the day. So we were actually just protecting you with some big thoughts, and you can go and enjoy the rest of the day now. Can we just have one more round of applause as the only way that we know how to give any appreciation? But for me, I'm going to start to shift the tone of the weekend and say, it's not just for what they said. It's for the fact that all of you are in this room. They are representatives of any of you that could have been here on this stage talking about your huge body of work and practice and labour. And so in the next moment of appreciation, can it be for all of the bodies of work that got us here, for all the people and the ancestors that got our thinking here, for those all around us, for all the bodies of work that you're all doing, for all the people who can't be in this room, for all those we lean on and we've built our ideas on, and for every moment that has brought us to here, so that as we go out of here, that moment of who we are together, where our thinking and our ideas and our knowledges and our practices and our not knowings, how they are a collective brain and a moment of gratitude for them, but in a wider sense. So go on, give it up for